A large force of police in helmets and riot gear had massed inside the entrance, next to the shuttered office of the estate manager. They were backed by some 30 bailiffs, itching to secure the dozen houses whose seizure they had announced. Confident of success, the police had alerted 3 television crews, and the cameras were already transmitting pictures of the action to the breakfast audiences. A Home Office minister was touring the studios, stressing the government's reluctant decision to bring this misguided demonstration to a halt. A bulldozer was manoeuvring itself against the barricade of cars in Beaufort Avenue, its scoop thrust clumsily at a Fiat Uno, the smallest vehicle in the barricade, but the residents clung to its doors and window pillars, distracting the hapless driver with their boos and jeers. Many of the women carried children on their shoulders. Frightened by the menacing helicopter and the bedlam of megaphones, the smaller infants were crying openly, their sobs drowned by the din of the bulldozer's engine, but not lost to the television viewers watching aghast across 1 million breakfast tables. Urged on by a senior social worker, a police inspector remonstrated with the parents and tried to climb the barricade. A flurry of hockey sticks drove him back with bruised knuckles. A young constable, seeing a quick way through the barricade, opened the front passenger door of a Volvo estate and climbed into the car, truncheon at the ready as he tried to open the driver's door. A dozen residents seized the car and rocked it fiercely, backed by a chant of "Out! Out! Out!" Within a minute, the constable was shaken insensible, flung from the front seat, and tipped, dazed, into the road at his colleague's feet. The police watched patiently, waiting beside their armoured vans with chain-link visors over the windscreens, making clear that the Chelsea Marina action differed in no way from the riot control measures they used in the East End's less savoury estates. They tightened their chin straps, wrapped their clubs against their shields, and moved forward when the bulldozer at last seized the Fiat Uno and lifted it into the air. Forming into a double file, they were ready to pour through the breach in the barricade and set upon the protesters. But the inspector threw up his arms and halted them as the toy-like Fiat teetered on the upraised scoop, ready to fall onto the jeering residents. Hatless in his concern, the inspector climbed the ladder to the bulldozer's cab and ordered the driver to shut down his engine. There was a brief standoff, while the inspector retrieved his cap and megaphone. Petrol was dripping from the Fiat's fuel tank, drops dancing around his feet. He called on the crowd to think of their children, who were now laughing happily at the car swaying over their heads. Chortling toddlers were lifted into the air to give them a better view and, more to the point, expose them to the breakfast TV audiences, watching open-mouthed over their toast racks. The inspector shook his head in despair, but he had reckoned without the long-ingrained ruthlessness of the middle class towards its own children. As I knew full well, any social group that would exile its offspring to the deforming rigours of boarding school life would think nothing of exposing them to the hazards of an exploding bonfire. Exhausted by all the emotion surging around me, I edged through the crowd and reached the pavement. I leant against a damaged parking meter and searched for any signs of K. Churchill. I soon noticed that a fellow observer was keeping watch on the action. Standing behind the television vans was the familiar figure of Major Tulloch, barrel chest and burly arms concealed inside another short tweed jacket, ginger moustache bristling at the scent of battle. As always, he seemed to be bored by the civil uprising that unfolded around him, and watched the helicopter hovering 100 yards away, its downdraft emptying a dozen litter bins and driving their contents across the rooftops like confetti. I assumed that he was the Home Secretary's man on the ground, and was probably in charge of the entire police action. The crowd seemed to sense that the Chelsea Marina protest was virtually over, quietening as the driver of the bulldozer reversed his vehicle, subtracting a small but significant element from the barricade. The inspector stood solemnly in front of the protesters, smiling at the small children, and satisfied that he had acted as humanely as his orders allowed. Faced by the waiting phalanx of riot police and bailiffs, the protesters began to disperse, lowering their baseball bats and croquet mallets, unable at the last moment to resist an appeal to restraint and good sense. Then a shout went up from a window overlooking the street. People stepped aside, cheering as a car approached, horns sounding an urgent call to arms.